Chicago looked beautiful from above, but beneath its frozen streets, power had a darker price. Under the glittering towers of the Gold Coast, behind a private elevator guarded by men in black suits, the city's richest criminals gathered inside the Velvet Room, an underground casino where loyalty was bought, betrayal was punished, and freedom could be sold for one night. Ivy Carter stood behind a velvet curtain with her hands folded tightly in front of her black satin uniform. At 23, she had already learned how to disappear while standing in plain sight. Her dark auburn hair was pinned low at the back of her neck, her face carefully calm, her eyes lowered because fear became easier to survive when nobody could see it. She was not there by choice. Her father's gambling debts had dragged her into the casino 6 months earlier. At first, they called it repayment work. Then they called it service. Then one night, the rules changed, and Ivy understood the truth. Debt was not money in this world. Debt was control. Every powerful man in the Velvet Room knew that. Crystal whiskey glasses clicked softly beneath low golden lights. Cigarette smoke curled through the air above velvet booths where syndicate bosses, corrupt businessmen, and political fixers watched the stage with hungry patience. Armed guards stood near every exit. No one laughed too loudly. No one moved without being noticed. The entire room breathed with danger. Ivy kept her expression controlled. Inside, her heart was pounding. For months, she had secretly memorized security patterns, staff entrances, elevator codes, and camera blind spots. Every night she played the quiet broken girl because quiet girls were underestimated. That was the only power she had left. She was not a victim. She was waiting. Then her name was announced. The curtain opened, and the room turned toward her. Cold attention touched every inch of her body as she stepped onto the small auction platform beneath the chandelier. The man running the event smiled like he was selling art, not a human being. He called her delicate, obedient, temporary, perfect for one private night. Ivy forced herself not to react. The bidding began. Numbers rose quickly from the tables. Men who owned hotels, ports, judges, and police captains lifted their fingers casually, treating her freedom like a game. Every bid tightened the invisible chain around her throat. She did not cry. Crying gave them power. She only stared toward the floor and counted her breaths. Then the room changed. A quiet voice from the darkest booth ended the auction with one impossible number. The entire casino fell silent. Adrian Moretti sat alone beneath the shadows, dressed in a black tailored suit and long wool coat, his expression cold enough to silence the room without effort. At 36, he ruled the Moretti syndicate with ruthless control. Chicago's criminal empire feared him because Adrian never acted from emotion. He did not chase pleasure. He did not buy distractions. He bought territory, loyalty, and silence. So when he bought Ivy Carter's freedom for one night, every syndicate boss in the room understood something dangerous had shifted. Ivy slowly lifted her eyes. Adrian was already watching her. Not like the others. He did not look amused. He did not look hungry. He looked as if he had seen something hidden beneath her controlled silence. Fear, yes. But also calculation. Survival. A hunted woman still searching for an exit. That interested him. The auctioneer laughed nervously and gestured for Ivy to step forward, but before anyone touched her, Adrian's voice cut through the room. Nobody touches her. The order was quiet, but every guard obeyed instantly. For the first time that night, Ivy felt the room fear someone else more than it wanted to own her. Adrian stood and walked toward her with slow, controlled power. He stopped close enough for Ivy to feel the danger surrounding him, but he did not grab her. He simply handed her a black coat and told her she was free for the night. Free. The word almost broke her. But Ivy knew better than to trust kings. As Adrian turned to speak with his men, Ivy's fingers brushed against the security keycard clipped beneath his coat. One silent movement. One stolen chance. Minutes later, while Adrian believed he had protected her, Ivy slipped through the service corridor, opened the private exit, and escaped into the freezing Chicago rain.
The freezing Chicago rain hit Ivy Carter's face the moment she escaped through the underground parking structure beneath the Velvet Room casino. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts while black luxury SUVs lined the concrete levels behind her like shadows waiting to drag her back underground. Neon reflections shimmered across wet pavement as thunder rolled above the city, But Ivy never slowed down. Fear had trained her well. She moved quickly through the sleeping streets with Adrian Moretti's stolen security keycard hidden inside her coat pocket, her heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Every distant siren sounded dangerous. Every pair of headlights felt like hunters closing in. She had spent months dreaming about escape, but now that freedom was finally within reach, terror followed beside it. Because powerful men never let women like her leave peacefully. Especially kings. Back inside the Velvet Room, Adrian Moretti stood silently near the private elevator while his security teams searched the building floor by floor. Nobody inside the casino dared speak loudly anymore. The atmosphere had shifted into something suffocating the moment his men discovered Ivy Carter was gone. A bodyguard approached carefully. "We're sealing the exits now." Adrian adjusted the cuff of his black suit slowly, his expression unreadable. "No," he said quietly. The guard froze. Every man inside the Moretti syndicate understood one dangerous truth. Adrian was most terrifying when calm. Rivals feared his silence more than war itself because emotional men made mistakes. Adrian never did. But tonight something unfamiliar sat beneath his control. Obsession. Nobody escaped Adrian Moretti. Especially not someone under his protection. Meanwhile, Ivy crossed into the west side of Chicago beneath freezing rain and flickering neon motel signs. She finally stopped near an abandoned roadside motel hidden between empty factories and railroad tracks. The building smelled like mold and forgotten lives, but the cracked walls and broken lights offered one thing she trusted more than luxury: anonymity. Ivy locked herself inside the tiny motel room and immediately checked every window twice. Trauma controlled her movements instinctively now. She searched beneath the bed, checked the bathroom vent, counted footsteps outside the door. Hyper-awareness had become survival long ago. She wrapped her thin arms around herself afterward, sitting silently against the wall while thunder echoed outside. Emotionally scarred women learned dangerous lessons early. Protection usually came with ownership. Safety usually came with chains. And Adrian Moretti felt dangerous in ways Ivy still could not understand. He looked at her too closely, too carefully. Like he saw something beneath her fear nobody else noticed. That terrified her more than the auction itself. Hours passed before exhaustion finally softened her breathing slightly. Ivy closed her eyes briefly while cold rain tapped against the motel windows, but sleep never fully arrived. Her body refused peace. Years of emotional survival kept her trapped between rest and readiness. Then headlights appeared outside the motel. Black SUVs. Ivy instantly stood. Heart pounding. Breath shallow. Fear crashed through her chest as footsteps approached slowly through the rain outside her room. She reached for the broken lamp near the bed like it might somehow protect her. A soft knock followed. No shouting. No threats. Only silence. Ivy stepped backward carefully while the motel door opened slowly. Adrian Moretti entered alone. Rain darkened his black overcoat while the dim motel light sharpened the cold angles of his face. Even inside a ruined roadside motel, he still looked powerful enough to own the city outside. But his eyes searched only for her. Ivy tightened her grip on the lamp. "I'm not going back." Adrian closed the door behind him quietly. "If I wanted to force you back, there would already be guards outside." The realization unsettled her immediately because he was right. Adrian slowly removed his gloves while studying the motel room around her. Broken heater. Thin blanket. Rust stains beneath the leaking sink. She chose this place willingly over safety because fear of dependence still controlled her more than comfort ever could. That interested him. "You planned disappearing completely?" Adrian said calmly. Ivy stayed silent. Adrian had already investigated her while she escaped. He discovered hidden bus tickets beneath her mattress at the casino dormitories. Cash saved secretly over months. Fake identification prepared carefully. Ivy Carter was never trying to survive inside the trafficking network. She was trying to vanish forever. Adrian stepped closer slowly, stopping just enough distance away to avoid cornering her emotionally. His voice lowered slightly. "You think every powerful man wants to own you?" Ivy laughed bitterly without humor. "Because they do." For the first time that night, something shifted behind Adrian's controlled expression. Not anger. Something quieter. Dangerous in a different way. Understanding. Rain hammered harder outside while the motel room filled with heavy silence between them. Adrian watched Ivy carefully now, noticing the exhaustion hidden beneath her fear. The emotionally hunted instinct to escape before attachment became another prison. She was not a victim, Adrian realized silently. She was surviving the only way she knew how. Finally, Adrian reached into his coat pocket and placed a hotel keycard gently onto the small table beside her. "Temporary protection," he said quietly. "Nothing else." Ivy stared at the keycard without moving. Luxury hotel. Private floor. Moretti security. A safe place. Everything inside her wanted to refuse immediately. Depending on dangerous men always ended badly. But standing inside the freezing motel room, Ivy suddenly realized another terrifying truth. She already felt safer beside Adrian Moretti than alone. That frightened her deeply. Adrian turned toward the door without pressuring her further, but before leaving, his encrypted phone vibrated sharply inside the silence. One message appeared across the screen. His expression darkened instantly. A rival syndicate had placed a bounty on Ivy Carter after her escape. Chicago's skyline glowed beneath freezing clouds as Adrian Moretti's armored convoy moved silently through the city toward the tallest private tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Black SUVs surrounded the lead vehicle while armed Moretti guards monitored every intersection through encrypted radios. Since the bounty announcement, Adrian's empire had shifted into quiet war mode. And at the center of that danger sat Ivy Carter. She remained silent during the drive, staring through bulletproof glass while neon reflections moved across her tired face. Every instinct inside her still screamed to escape before emotional dependence trapped her again. But the deeper truth frightened her more. She no longer felt safe alone. The convoy finally disappeared beneath a private underground entrance guarded by biometric scanners and heavily armed security teams. Private elevators opened instantly the moment Adrian stepped forward, his presence alone enough to silence the atmosphere around him. Power moved differently around kings. Ivy followed him upward in silence, her pulse tightening with every passing floor until the elevator doors finally opened into Adrian Moretti's penthouse. The space looked less like a home and more like a fortress built above Chicago. Massive bulletproof windows overlooked the frozen skyline while soft golden lighting reflected across black marble floors and expensive Italian furniture. Armed guards quietly protected every entrance without speaking. Even the silence inside the penthouse felt controlled. Safe. Dangerously safe. Ivy hated how much relief her body felt stepping inside. Adrian noticed immediately. The way her shoulders relaxed slightly. The way her breathing slowed after the elevator doors closed behind them. Emotionally hunted people always reacted strongly to safety because survival kept their bodies trapped in constant fear. She's exhausted, Adrian realized silently. But exhaustion never weakened her awareness. Ivy's eyes still searched exits automatically. She tracked every guard position instinctively. Every locked door. Every camera angle. Years of surviving abuse and debt slavery trained her to stay prepared for betrayal long before it arrived. Adrian watched everything quietly. That was how he learned people best. Not through words. Through observation. Later that night, Ivy stood alone near the penthouse windows overlooking Chicago while snow mixed with rain across the glass outside. Adrian remained across the room handling syndicate business through low-controlled conversations and encrypted phone calls. Rivals were already targeting Moretti operations after learning Ivy existed inside his protection network. The city understood what Adrian refused admitting publicly. The emotionally scarred runaway woman mattered to him now. That made her dangerous. One loud crash from the kitchen suddenly echoed through the penthouse after a glass slipped from a staff member's hand. Ivy flinched instantly. Sure. Instinctive. Fear moved across her face before she could hide it again. Adrian noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly while Ivy quickly lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the reaction. Trauma never truly disappeared. It only learned silence. Adrian dismissed the kitchen staff afterward and quietly ordered softer security rotations overnight. No loud radio communication. No sudden movements near Ivy. Extra guards positioned near private elevator access. Protection. Control. Obsession slowly disguising itself as concern. Over the next several days, Adrian learned more about Ivy without forcing confessions from her. He noticed she barely slept more than a few hours at a time. She always chose chairs facing exits. She hated closed doors. And every time someone stood too close unexpectedly, her breathing changed. One night Adrian found her awake near sunrise wrapped inside one of his oversized sweaters while Chicago's skyline glowed blue beyond the windows. "You don't sleep," he observed quietly. Ivy stared toward the city instead of him. "Sleeping deeply around dangerous people gets women hurt." The honesty in her voice unsettled him. Adrian slowly sat across from her while silence filled the room. Most people feared him openly. Ivy feared something deeper. Dependence. Vulnerability. The emotional prison created when survival began relying on someone else. And somehow, Adrian understood that fear. Hours later during a syndicate meeting inside the lower security floor, Adrian's inner circle finally confronted him directly. "She's becoming a weakness," one capo warned carefully. Another mentioned rival syndicates already testing Moretti territory because rumors about Adrian's emotional attachment were spreading through Chicago. "She's changing your priorities." Adrian remained calm throughout the discussion, adjusting the cuff of his black shirt slowly while dangerous silence settled across the room. Then he looked up. Cold. Controlled. "She stays," he said quietly. Nobody challenged him after that. Because kings did not explain emotional decisions to empires. But the whispers spread anyway. What? Protect her. Dangerous obsession. The Moretti syndicate had ruled Chicago through fear and loyalty for decades. Now every captain inside the empire understood something impossible had happened. Adrian Moretti finally cared about someone personally. That made Ivy both protected and hunted. Later that evening, Ivy walked quietly through the penthouse hallway searching for water after another sleepless night. Low voices drifting from Adrian's private office stopped her footsteps instantly. The door remained slightly open. Inside, several syndicate leaders stood around Adrian's office speaking in tense whispers. "She's destabilizing the empire. Rivals won't stop while she exists. One emotionally compromised decision could start a war." Then another colder voice answered quietly. "We may need to remove her permanently from Adrian's life before she destroys everything." The whispers Ivy overheard outside Adrian Moretti's office refused to leave her mind afterward. Even hours later, while cold rain rolled across the penthouse windows and Chicago disappeared beneath midnight fog, those quiet syndicate voices still echoed inside her chest like warnings she could not ignore. "She's destabilizing the empire. One weakness can destroy a king. Remove her permanently." Ivy stood alone near the massive windows with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring down at the city lights far below. The penthouse remained silent except for distant thunder and the low murmur of security radios moving through private hallways. Everything around her looked safe. Luxury. Protected. But emotionally scarred women learned dangerous truths early. Safe places never lasted forever. Especially beside powerful men. For days Adrian had become softer around her in ways she still struggled understanding. He noticed when she stopped eating. He noticed when nightmares kept her awake. He quietly replaced aggressive security teams with calmer guards because he realized loud voices made her flinch instinctively. No man had ever observed her pain carefully enough to protect her from it before. That terrified her more than violence ever could. Because dependence was dangerous. Dependence became chains. And Ivy refused becoming the weakness powerful enemies used to destroy Adrian Moretti. The realization settled painfully inside her chest while she watched rainwater streak across the glass overlooking Chicago's skyline. Somewhere beneath all the fear surrounding them, Adrian had started becoming her safe place. That could ruin him. So Ivy made a decision. She would disappear before his empire burned because of her. The next evening the penthouse felt unusually tense as Moretti captains moved between private meetings discussing rival syndicate pressure throughout Chicago. Adrian remained downstairs handling political negotiations tied to shipping routes and city officials while security teams rotated through shift changes near midnight. Ivy noticed everything carefully. Old survival instincts returned immediately. The timing of patrols. The blind spots near the private elevator. The temporary gap during rooftop helipad security replacement. She packed lightly afterward. Passport. One small bag. Nothing else. Emotionally hunted people learned attachment slowed escape. Still, her hands shook while zipping the bag closed. Because for the first time in years, leaving actually hurt. Rain hammered against the penthouse windows as Ivy quietly slipped through the private hallway leading toward the rooftop elevator. Every step felt heavier than expected. The deeper she moved into silence, the harder her breathing became. Heart pounding. Fear tightening. Not fear of being caught. Fear of losing safety. That realization nearly stopped her completely. The rooftop doors finally opened into freezing wind and rain above Chicago. Helicopter lights reflected across wet concrete while storm clouds swallowed the skyline beyond the tower. Ivy tightened Adrian's oversized black coat around herself before moving quickly toward the private helipad access gate. Then a calm voice stopped her instantly. "You were leaving again." Ivy froze. Adrian stood near the rooftop entrance beneath the rain, his dark coat moving sharply in the wind while city lights flickered behind him. No guards. No weapons. Only Adrian himself watching her with quiet, dangerous control. Somehow that felt more intense than violence. Ivy lowered her eyes briefly. You should let me go. Adrian walked closer slowly. Controlled. Close enough for her breath to catch. You think disappearing protects me, he said quietly. It does. The answer came too fast. Too emotional. Rain soaked through Ivy's hair while years of fear finally surfaced beneath her controlled composure. Men like you always destroy women like me eventually, she whispered shakily. Maybe not intentionally. But power destroys everything around it. Adrian remained silent for several seconds while thunder rolled across the skyline above them. Then he stepped even closer. Close enough for Ivy to feel warmth beneath the freezing rain. You are the only thing in my life that makes the violence quiet, Adrian admitted softly. The confession shattered something emotionally inside her. Because kings were never supposed to sound vulnerable. Adrian Moretti ruled Chicago through fear, loyalty, and ruthless emotional control. Entire syndicates feared his name. Politicians obeyed him. Criminal empires collapsed because of him. Yet standing beneath the storm, he looked at Ivy like losing her would destroy something vital inside him. Dangerous protector. Safe place. What? The emotional intensity between them became suffocating. Ivy's breathing trembled while Adrian gently removed the travel bag from her hand before speaking again. You are safest beside me. The words wrapped around her heart painfully because deep down, she already knew they were true. That was the problem. For the first time in her life, safety felt real enough to stay for. And Ivy Carter did not know how to survive love without fearing it. Adrian slowly guided her back toward the rooftop entrance while rain continued crashing around them. His hand remained lightly against her back, protective without force, calm without ownership. The quiet intimacy unsettled Ivy more than threats ever could. Because she wanted to trust him now. That made her vulnerable. Far below the penthouse tower, however, another dangerous decision had already been made. Inside a black luxury sedan parked across the street, one of Adrian's trusted syndicate captains quietly sent encrypted files through a secure burner phone. Private penthouse access routes. Security rotations. Ivy Carter's exact location. The betrayal had officially begun. The betrayal inside the Moretti syndicate spread through Chicago faster than winter storms. Within 48 hours of Ivy's location leaking, rival groups began targeting Moretti casinos, shipping routes, and private financial operations across the city. News channels called it organized criminal instability. Politicians whispered about war behind closed doors. But inside Adrian Moretti's empire, everyone understood the truth. The chaos started because of Ivy Carter. Snow mixed with cold rain outside the penthouse while armed guards doubled security across every Moretti property. Helicopters circled above downtown towers at night. Encrypted phones never stopped vibrating. Every room inside Adrian's empire carried tension sharp enough to suffocate breathing itself. And Ivy felt blamed for all of it. Nobody accused her directly at first. The whispers came quietly instead. Syndicate wives stopped speaking when she entered rooms. Security captains looked at her differently now, less respectful and more cautious, as if she carried danger behind her skin. One older mafia elite finally muttered the sentence aloud during a private gathering downstairs. She's just damaged cargo. The words reached Ivy anyway. Emotionally scarred women always heard the things people tried hiding. She stood silently near the penthouse balcony later that night, staring at Chicago beneath falling snow while those words replayed endlessly inside her mind. Cargo. Weakness. Distraction. The deeper Adrian protected her, the more unstable his empire became. Fear tightened painfully inside her chest. Because she was beginning to love him enough to leave. Adrian noticed the emotional distance immediately. Over the past few weeks, he learned Ivy's silences too well. The way she withdrew emotionally whenever guilt consumed her. The way her breathing changed before she disappeared into herself mentally. But Adrian barely had time to confront it now because pressure from inside the syndicate kept growing more dangerous every day. Political alliances were collapsing. Rival families demanded negotiations. And Chicago's most powerful criminal council began pressuring Adrian toward an arranged engagement with Celeste Verona, daughter of another influential mafia empire. The union would stabilize business routes, strengthen territory control, and silence growing unrest surrounding Ivy Carter permanently. Everyone expected Adrian to accept. Kings protected empires before emotions. But Adrian remained colder than ever toward everyone except Ivy. During meetings he barely spoke unless necessary. His dangerous silence unsettled entire rooms while captains argued over territory losses and syndicate loyalty. Yet the moment Ivy entered the penthouse afterward, something in him shifted instantly. Softer. Protective. Human. That terrified his empire more than war itself. Ivy watched the emotional divide growing wider every day. Adrian fought entire criminal organizations while still making sure she ate dinner. Still checking whether she slept peacefully. Still positioning guards outside her room personally every night before dawn. No man had ever protected her without wanting ownership in return. But Adrian protected her because he genuinely feared losing her. That made leaving harder. Still, Ivy secretly prepared another escape. She packed quietly over several nights, hiding cash and fake documents beneath the bathroom floor panel near the guest suite. If Adrian chose political stability eventually, she wanted to disappear before he sacrificed her emotionally to save his empire. Because kings always chose power eventually. Didn't they? Then Adrian discovered the betrayal. One encrypted financial transfer exposed everything. His trusted consigliere Vincent D'Amico had been secretly feeding information to rival syndicates for weeks while encouraging instability around Ivy intentionally. Vincent believed Adrian's emotional attachment weakened the empire and planned forcing him back toward political loyalty through pressure and fear. The realization changed everything. Adrian stood inside the lower penthouse conference room surrounded by syndicate captains while snowstorms swallowed Chicago outside the windows. Vincent attempted justifying his actions calmly, insisting he betrayed Adrian to protect the Moretti empire itself. You are risking everything for one emotionally damaged girl. The room fell silent. Heart-pounding tension spread across the table while Adrian slowly removed his gloves, his expression colder than anyone inside the empire had ever witnessed before. Then he spoke quietly. She is under my protection. Vincent shook his head bitterly. Protection is one thing. Obsession is another. Adrian's eyes darkened instantly. Because the accusation was true. The dangerous part was how little he cared anymore. For years Adrian Moretti built his empire through emotional control. Fear maintained loyalty. Distance maintained power. But Ivy Carter destroyed that system simply by existing beside him. And Adrian no longer wanted saving from it. Hours later, during a massive syndicate gathering inside the Moretti Tower ballroom, Adrian publicly rejected the arranged engagement alliance with the Verona family in front of Chicago's criminal elite. Gasps spread instantly through the room. Political leaders exchanged stunned looks. Rival captains whispered in disbelief. Because Adrian Moretti had just chosen Ivy Carter over empire stability itself. What? The message echoed silently through every syndicate in Chicago. Ivy stood near the balcony watching everything unfold with overwhelmed fear and dangerous emotion twisting together inside her chest. Nobody had ever chosen her before. Not over power. Not over loyalty. Not over survival itself. And suddenly losing Adrian terrified her more than running ever had. But while the empire reacted to Adrian's impossible decision, another threat had already entered the gala unnoticed. Masked beneath luxury gowns, champagne servers, and political smiles. Rival syndicate operatives moved silently through the ballroom toward Ivy's position. Then the lights suddenly went black. And when the emergency generators activated seconds later, Ivy Carter was gone. The moment Ivy Carter disappeared from the Moretti Charity Gala, Chicago stopped feeling like a city and started feeling like a battlefield. Emergency lights flickered across terrified politicians and syndicate elites while armed guards flooded every hallway. Private elevators locked automatically. Yet Adrian Moretti remained completely still in the center of the chaos. That silence terrified everyone. Because the King of Chicago had finally lost something emotionally important. And dangerous men destroyed entire empires when fear touched their hearts. Outside, snowstorms hammered the city while Moretti security teams reviewed surveillance footage frame by frame. Black armored convoys flooded downtown streets. Helicopters circled above the lakefront. Every Moretti captain received the same order. Find Ivy Carter. No matter what burns afterward. Meanwhile, Ivy sat inside a private room deep within the Verona Syndicate estate. Massive iron gates surrounded the property while armed guards monitored the frozen grounds. The estate looked luxurious. But Ivy recognized prisons regardless of how beautiful they appeared. Fear still existed inside her. Panic did not. Years of trauma had taught her survival. While her captors expected tears and emotional collapse, Ivy remained calm, observing everything. She noticed which guards hated their shifts, which servants feared Adrian Moretti's name, and which syndicate members secretly questioned the kidnapping itself. Fear already existed inside the Verona estate. Adrian was coming. And everyone knew it. Across Chicago, the Moretti empire transformed into organized war. Luxury SUVs blocked intersections. Intelligence teams hacked security systems. Nightclubs closed early. Corrupt officials disappeared from public view. But none of it mattered to Adrian anymore. Not politics. Not territory. Not empire stability. Only Ivy. Inside his armored SUV, Adrian stared at surveillance photos showing Ivy entering the gala and disappearing during the blackout. For the first time in years, something disturbed him more than losing power. Losing her. Kings were never supposed to care enough to become vulnerable. Yet an entire empire now moved because one emotionally scarred woman had vanished from his reach. Hours later, Ivy learned something critical. A frightened maid quietly revealed that the Verona family planned to trade her to another criminal network before sunrise. The information sharpened her survival instincts immediately. She refused becoming cargo again. Not after Adrian made her feel human. For weeks she had resisted emotional attachment, believing safety around powerful men was temporary. But Adrian never treated her like property. He listened to her fears. Protected her without demanding anything in return. And now an entire city was burning because he refused to lose her. The realization hit harder than expected. Near midnight, Adrian finally located the Verona estate through intercepted communications and shipping intelligence. Snow covered the massive property while Moretti convoys silently surrounded every access road. Helicopters hovered above frozen trees. Chicago's criminal world held its breath. War between the Moretti and Verona empires could destroy the city. But Adrian no longer cared. The rescue operation began beneath freezing snowfall. Moretti soldiers moved through the estate with terrifying precision while alarms echoed across the property. Ivy heard the chaos immediately. Running footsteps. Emergency lockdowns. Fear spreading through the halls. Then she heard something else. Adrian's voice. Come. Controlled. Close. Moments later the door opened. Adrian stepped inside wearing a black wool coat dusted with snow while armed guards secured the hallway behind him. His eyes found Ivy instantly. Relief flashed across his face. Ivy stared at him speechlessly. Because nobody had ever come back for her before. Not family. Not lovers. Not anyone. Yet Adrian Moretti had crossed into war for her. He stepped closer and gently touched her face. You're safe now, he said quietly. Safe. The word almost broke her. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had chosen her survival over politics, power, and empire. And she realized she never wanted to run from him again. But as they reached the snow-covered courtyard outside, chaos erupted. An explosion thundered near the convoy line. Adrian instantly pulled Ivy behind him. Shattered headlights exploded across the darkness. Screaming tires echoed through the snow. Smoke filled the air. Then everything happened too fast. And Ivy watched in horror as Adrian Moretti took the full impact of the attack and collapsed in front of her. Snow covered the private Moretti medical estate hidden deep beyond Chicago's northern shoreline, where frozen forests surrounded the isolated mansion like silent guards protecting a wounded king. The estate had once been built for political disappearances and emergency syndicate recoveries, but now every hallway carried a different kind of tension. Fear. Not fear of rival empires. Fear of losing Adrian Moretti. Ivy Carter sat beside his bed beneath soft golden lights while doctors and security teams moved quietly through the estate outside. For 2 days she barely slept. She refused leaving the room even once, ignoring food, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring the whispered concerns from Moretti captains stationed beyond the private doors. Because every time Adrian's breathing slowed, panic tightened around her chest hard enough to steal her own breath away. She hated how deeply he affected her now. The dangerous mafia king who once terrified Chicago had become the only place where her emotionally scarred soul ever felt safe. And seeing him vulnerable shattered something inside her completely. The Moretti syndicate noticed the change immediately. At first, guards watched Ivy cautiously while she remained beside Adrian's bed through endless silent nights. But slowly the atmosphere around her shifted. Men who once viewed her as dangerous distraction now saw something else instead. Loyalty. Real loyalty. She adjusted Adrian's blankets personally when fever weakened him. She sat awake during storm-filled nights listening to his breathing because fear of losing him kept her heart pounding constantly. Even the older estate staff began treating her differently now, quietly bringing coffee and food into the room without asking questions. The emotionally hunted girl from the Velvet Room was slowly becoming something far more dangerous inside the Moretti empire. someone beloved by its king. One freezing night, while snowstorms crashed against the massive estate windows, Ivy finally broke emotionally. Adrian remained unconscious beneath soft medical lights while silence filled the room around them. Ivy gently held his hand against her chest as tears finally slipped down her face without permission. Nobody had ever protected her like this before. Nobody had ever crossed into war for her survival. And somewhere between the fear, the safety, and the dangerous emotional surrender growing between them, Ivy realized the truth she spent weeks trying to escape. She loved him. The realization terrified her. Because love meant vulnerability. Love meant losing control. But Adrian Moretti had already become the center of every safe feeling she ever experienced. Several hours later, near sunrise, Adrian finally opened his eyes. The moment Ivy saw movement, relief crashed through her so intensely she nearly collapsed beside him. Adrian looked weaker than usual beneath the dim lighting, his sharp features softened slightly by exhaustion, but the first thing he searched for was her. Always her. Heart pounding, Ivy moved closer instantly while Adrian slowly reached for her hand. "You stayed," he murmured quietly. The words almost destroyed her emotionally because nobody had ever sounded genuinely surprised someone remained beside them before. Ivy lowered her eyes briefly. "There wasn't anywhere else I wanted to be." Silence settled softly between them afterward. Not cold silence. Safe silence. Over the following weeks the medical estate transformed into something strangely peaceful despite the empire still raging outside its gates. Adrian recovered slowly while Ivy remained beside him constantly. Their relationship deepened through quiet moments instead of dramatic confessions. Shared coffee near snow-covered windows. Late nights reading intelligence reports together. Adrian resting his hand lightly against her waist whenever she walked too far from him instinctively. Protective closeness became natural between them now. And for the first time in years, Adrian himself started changing emotionally. The violent tension constantly living beneath his control softened around Ivy in ways nobody believed possible. His empire still feared him. Rivals still whispered his name carefully. But Ivy witnessed the man hidden beneath the king for the first time. Quiet. Protective. Emotionally exhausted from carrying an empire alone. One night beside the estate fireplace, Adrian finally looked toward Ivy with dangerous honesty burning behind his calm expression. "You changed me," he admitted quietly. Ivy's breathing caught softly. Adrian rarely confessed anything emotional directly. Men raised inside syndicates learned vulnerability became weakness quickly. Yet his eyes remained fixed on her now, completely unguarded. "Before you," he continued, "everything felt cold, necessary, controlled. Then you walked into my world and suddenly losing one person terrified me more than losing power itself." What? The word existed silently beneath every glance he gave her. Ivy slowly moved closer afterward, resting beside him while snow continued falling outside the estate windows. For the first time in her life she stopped planning escape routes mentally. Stopped searching exits instinctively. Stopped preparing herself emotionally for abandonment. Because Adrian Moretti never made her feel trapped. He made her feel chosen. That changed everything. Even the Moretti family slowly accepted her influence after witnessing Adrian's transformation. Violence inside the empire became more controlled. Adrian listened more carefully. Loyal workers received better protection for their families. The king himself looked more human beside Ivy. And the empire respected strength. Especially emotional strength surviving pain without becoming cruel. Weeks later Adrian finally returned to Chicago publicly for the first time since the Verona War. The entire syndicate gathered inside the Moretti Tower ballroom expecting political negotiations regarding rebuilding alliances and territory control. Instead, Adrian delivered something nobody expected. Standing beneath the massive chandeliers with Ivy beside him, Adrian calmly announced that Ivy Carter would stand at his side during the upcoming Empire Summit. Not as protected guest. Not as temporary obsession. But as future queen of the Moretti Syndicate. Shock spread through the ballroom instantly. And Ivy realized the king of Chicago had just chosen her publicly over fear, politics, and power itself. Chicago's criminal world gathered beneath gold chandeliers and crystal light inside the Moretti Grand Hall, where kings, politicians, syndicate leaders, and billion-dollar empires arrived beneath armored convoys and black security lines for the largest empire summit the city had witnessed in decades. The atmosphere carried quiet danger beneath luxury. Every whispered conversation felt political. Every smile concealed loyalty calculations and betrayal risks. And at the center of it all stood Adrian Moretti. The King of Chicago arrived wearing a perfectly tailored black suit with the calm, dangerous control that once made entire syndicates fear speaking his name too loudly. But tonight something about him looked different. Alive. Because beside him walked Ivy Carter. The same emotionally scarred runaway woman once sold beneath underground casino lights now entered the Summit ballroom like someone reborn through survival itself. Her long dark auburn hair flowed softly over an elegant black silk gown while diamond earrings reflected the golden light above the hall. She no longer looked hunted. She looked powerful. The entire criminal world noticed instantly. Whispers spread across the ballroom the moment Adrian guided her beside him publicly for the first time. Rival syndicate bosses exchanged stunned glances. Political elites watched carefully. Older mafia wives lowered their voices behind champagne glasses because nobody expected Adrian Moretti to bring Ivy Carter into the Summit openly. Not after the war. Not after the betrayal. Not after choosing her over political alliances and empire stability itself. But Adrian walked beside her calmly, one hand resting protectively against the small of her back like the entire room already belonged to her. What? The dangerous message existed silently inside every movement between them. Ivy felt hundreds of eyes following her while they crossed the ballroom floor, but for the first time in her life, fear no longer controlled her breathing. Weeks beside Adrian changed something deep inside her emotionally. The terrified girl who once searched every room for exits no longer felt the instinct to run constantly. Because she finally understood something life-changing. Safety was not weakness. And Adrian never tried controlling her through fear. He protected her because he genuinely loved her. That realization transformed everything. The summit officially began moments later beneath massive chandeliers while rival empires negotiated territory, finances, political influence, and syndicate partnerships. Adrian remained cold and controlled during discussions as always, but Ivy noticed how often his attention quietly returned toward her throughout the evening. Protective. Grounded. Human. The King of Chicago no longer looked emotionally empty beside her. That terrified his rivals more than violence ever had. Hours later Adrian finally stood before the entire summit hall while silence slowly spread through the room. Politicians stopped talking. Syndicate leaders lowered their whiskey glasses. Every criminal empire waited carefully because Adrian Moretti rarely spoke publicly unless his words carried consequences. His eyes moved toward Ivy first, then toward the room. Ivy Carter stands under permanent Moretti protection, Adrian said calmly. Any threat against her becomes a threat against my empire. Shock moved quietly through the ballroom. Not because of the declaration itself. Because Adrian sounded emotionally certain. Like a king openly placing his heart beside the throne where enemies could finally see it. But Adrian no longer cared. Ivy looked at him quietly while emotion tightened painfully inside her chest. Months ago she was emotionally broken, trapped beneath debt, slavery, and fear. Now the most feared mafia king in Chicago openly chose her before rival empires and political elites. Not as property. Not as weakness. As someone worthy of standing beside him. The realization almost overwhelmed her. Over the following months, Ivy slowly transformed the Moretti empire in ways nobody predicted. While Adrian controlled syndicates through power and fear, Ivy created loyalty through compassion. She quietly funded housing for families tied to injured syndicate workers. She established private protection systems for vulnerable women trapped inside criminal debt networks. She personally visited struggling neighborhoods connected to Moretti operations instead of hiding inside luxury towers. People inside the empire began whispering about her differently afterward. Queen. Not because Adrian protected her. Because she protected others despite everything she survived herself. She was not a victim anymore. She became powerful emotionally. Adrian watched the transformation constantly with dangerous admiration hidden beneath his calm exterior. The emotionally scarred runaway woman once terrified of trusting powerful men now walked confidently beside him through private airports, armored convoys, Italian estates, and billionaire empire negotiations without losing her humanity. And Adrian realized something impossible. Ivy made him want peace more than war. That changed him more than love itself. One winter evening during another major syndicate gathering inside the Moretti ballroom, Adrian stood before Chicago's criminal empire once again with Ivy beside him wearing an elegant dark emerald gown beneath the golden chandeliers. The room fell silent instinctively. Then Adrian slowly reached for Ivy's hand. Heart pounding. Breath catching softly. He lifted her hand carefully before pressing his lips against it in front of the entire empire. The same mafia world that once treated Ivy Carter like damaged cargo now lowered their heads respectfully toward her. Queen beside the king. full circle transformation. And in that moment Ivy finally understood the deepest truth about Adrian Moretti. He never truly bought her freedom. He gave it back emotionally. Hours later, long after the summit ended, Adrian and Ivy sat quietly inside his private jet flying above Chicago while snow-covered city lights glowed beneath the clouds below. The atmosphere inside the cabin felt calm for the first time in months. Ivy rested peacefully beside him while Adrian watched the skyline disappear beneath the storm. Safe. Together. Then Adrian's encrypted security phone vibrated sharply against the leather seat beside him. His expression darkened instantly after reading the message. One sentence. Cold enough to stop his breathing. They discovered who Ivy Carter really is.